Alright, so we'll start today's lecture. This is technically the last one, except for the next one will be the review. So today is the bonus content for that we're going to talk about a little more about project management. We've taken some time introduced everyone of this concept, despite the main theme of this course has been agile programming, and then also we actually need to distinguish agile programming from agile project management, but there's some overlap there. So usually if you approach that with agile programming, then most likely the PM process will also be agile. But there's also other workflows like waterfall, and there are some others that we've actually briefly introduced it in the previous courses. But today we will basically give a more detailed look at it. Primarily the three main stages: project initiation, project planning, and project execution. So we will learn a bit more about these three stages, look at some more details from the PM perspective, and then look back on the role of an engineer in a project, or if we put it the IT side, and then we try to fit it into the big picture, or the project management procedure. Okay, so to begin with, we will. So again, all the contents are brought from this course that's available on Coursera. So you could also just enroll this course online. It's free, and then learn more. So today we are going to take course 2, 3, 4. Each explores more on the corresponding stage of the PM lifecycle, and we won't finish all because each course by itself it has like multiple modules. So we'll just go through the introduction of each course, or basically each stage, and hopefully you can get a better understanding what's supposed to be happening in each stage. And although here we're largely talking about waterfall, or not really talking about waterfall. It's just mostly looking at these stages from the waterfall procedure perspective. But since all the other, not really all, most of the other approaches, it just change the time window of each iteration, right? So for example, in the agile context, what we have talked about is like we iterate every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. Then all these three stages will go through all these stages in each iteration. So at the beginning of each iteration, like every Monday of 2 weeks, the first Monday of every 2 weeks, there's usually a meeting, planning meeting, and then where people would initiate new tasks, if any. If not, then initiation might be just skipped. Then there's planning phase to figure out the schedules, make estimates, assign resources, stuff like that. And then throughout that entire 2 weeks, that's project execution, that everybody follows along the plan, and if anything goes wrong, if any issue arises, then how do we address it? So that's that. Okay. Yeah. Those being said, let's get into the video. So first, it'll be project initiation.
Hi there, welcome. This course is all about initiating a project successfully. If you haven't gone through our foundational course yet, we recommend checking it out. It covers the foundations of project management and contains lots of helpful information for anyone wanting to start a career in this field. There are lots of people around the world like you who are hoping to learn the skills to get a project management role. Maybe you prefer to take a specialized certification rather than a 4-year degree. Maybe you're looking for an affordable way to stand out among competition. Maybe you're interested in changing your career. Whatever your reason for being here, we are glad you've joined us. This program is rooted in the belief that a strong foundation in project management can help anyone start a great career as a project manager. Before we begin this course, let me introduce myself. My name is Juan, and I'll be your instructor for this course. As a senior program manager at Google for the past 8 years, I have worked on cross-functional projects involving product managers, software engineers, user experience designers, network operations, customer support, and more to build software used at Google and used by Google Cloud customers. I began my career working as a liaison between customers and engineers, documenting requirements on software development projects. As I became involved in larger projects, I started to manage the timelines of the projects and coordinate the work of the different teams that had to get involved to finish the project. Before I knew it, I was the de facto project manager. I have accumulated my knowledge through formal and informal training, finding practical application in finance, insurance, and tech companies. I'm super excited to be sharing with you more about the project management discipline. During this course, you'll learn all the steps for kicking off a project. We'll start with an overview of initiation, which is the phase that allows ideas to come together and form the beginnings of a plan for a project. You'll identify the individual components of initiation, like the project scope, goals, and deliverables. You'll also learn how to measure the success of a project. This is a super important piece of the puzzle. After all, you want to be able to meet or exceed all of the requirements for a successful project, right? Later, we'll talk about how to identify stakeholders. Stakeholders have a direct interest in the project's completion and success. We'll teach you about some really helpful tools you can use to define project roles and responsibilities, and more tools and resources you typically need to complete the work of a project. Finally, we'll introduce documentation that can help your team prepare for project kickoff. Exciting, right? The skills you learn in this course will help you start projects of your own. We can't wait to get into these topics with you. So let's get started. Meet me in the next video. Welcome back. In the last course, you learned that initiation is the first phase within the project lifecycle, followed by planning, executing, and closing. Makes sense, right? Regardless of your chosen methodology, all projects have to start somewhere. Let's talk more about initiation and why it's important for the success of a project. Because initiation is the first phase of the project, it's really important to get it right. A well-planned initiation results in a strong foundation for your project and sets it up for success. Initiation begins after a problem or opportunity has been identified within an organization. Often, stakeholders like senior leaders at a company will initiate a project to address a specific need for the business. For example, perhaps the company would like to roll out a new product, improve employee well-being, or reduce costs in a certain department. It's your responsibility as the project manager to help identify the project goals, resources, and other details based on initial discussions with the project stakeholders. Even though someone else might come up with an idea for the project, it's still your job to figure out all the important pieces that need to come together in order to get the work done. The initiation phase is a crucial time for asking stakeholders the right questions, performing research, determining resources, and clearly documenting the key components of a project. Doing this will help you solidify the scope or the boundary of the project. If this seems a bit overwhelming, don't worry. We'll talk more about project scope later on in this course. If a project isn't initiated properly, things can go wrong pretty fast. For example, without sufficient understanding of the project's goals, you might underestimate what resources you need or how long the project might take. Or without agreeing with stakeholders on what success looks like, you might think the project was completed successfully, while the stakeholders might think it didn't accomplish their goals. Getting on the same page and gaining clarity during the initiation phase can save a lot of time and extra work for everyone throughout the project. Proper initiation also helps ensure that the benefits of the project outcomes will outweigh the costs of the project. To determine this, you'll do what's called a cost-benefit analysis, which is the process of adding up the expected value of a project, the benefits, and comparing them to the dollar cost. To do this, you will work with stakeholders to consider a few questions. To determine the benefits of a project, those questions might include: what value will this project create? How much money could this project save our organization? How much money will it bring in from existing customers? How much time will be saved? How will the user experience be improved? And to determine the costs of a project, those questions might include: how much time will people have to spend on this project? What will be the one-time costs? Are there any ongoing costs? What about long-term costs? The benefits of a project should always outweigh the costs, so it's really important that you consider these questions early on. Coming up, we'll talk more about the initiation phase and explore the key components of initiating a project. Bye for now. Hello, and welcome back. You just learned about the initiation phase of the project lifecycle and why it's so important to get it right. Next, I'll teach you about the key components that make up initiation and how these pieces lead to the planning phase of a project. There are several key components of initiation that you need to consider in order for your project to be successful: goals, scope, deliverables, success criteria, stakeholders, and resources. First, you need to consider the goals of a project. The goal is what you've been asked to do and what you're trying to achieve. All projects should have clear goals, and often those will be determined by senior company leaders with your help. From there, you will begin to consider the project's scope. This is the process to define the work that needs to happen to complete the project. You also need to think about project deliverables. There are products and services that you will create for your customer, client, or project sponsor. Deliverables can be anything from product features and functionalities to documentation, processes, and more. Anything that enables the goal of your project to be achieved. Deliverables are submitted to help you reach your project goals. Also, it's important to keep in mind that deliverables can be tangible or intangible. An example of a tangible deliverable might be submitting a chapter of a manuscript if the goal is to publish a textbook. Or if your project goal is to finish implementation of a new point-of-sale software at a retail store, scheduling staff training sessions could be an intangible deliverable. Once the goals, scope, and deliverables are determined, you need to consider success criteria. Success criteria are the standards by which you measure how successful a project was in reaching its goals. Another important consideration is your stakeholders. Stakeholders are key to making informed decisions at every step of the project, including the initiation phase. They're the people who both have an interest in and are affected by the completion and success of a project. As a result, they're often instrumental in determining the goals, objectives, deliverables, and success criteria of a project, from coming up with the idea to outlining the expectations of its results. As you move through the initiation phase, It's your job to ensure that you understand the needs of the project stakeholders early on. It's also your role to ensure that all stakeholders are in agreement on the goals and overall mission of the project before moving on to the next phase. Now, let's talk about resources. Resources generally refer to the budget, people, materials, and other items that you'll have at your disposal. It's super important to think carefully about these pieces early on. No one wants to get started on a project only to realize halfway through that they don't have enough money or enough people to complete the work. That would be a mess. Finally, once you've established your goals, scope, deliverables, success criteria, stakeholders, and resources, it's time to create a project charter. A project charter is a document that contains all the details of a project. Project charters clearly define the project and its goals and outline what is needed to accomplish them. A project charter allows you to get organized, set up a framework for what needs to be done, and communicate those details to others. Once you've drafted the charter, you would then review the document with key stakeholders to get their approval to move into the planning stage. Coming up, you'll learn more about project charters and even get the chance to create one yourself. Hopefully, you're starting to see how the key components of initiation help lay the foundation of a solid project. To quickly recap, you'll gather information about your goals, scope, deliverables, success criteria, stakeholders, and resources. And you'll document that information in the project charter. During the rest of this course, we'll talk more about each of the components outlined so far. You've come so far and learned so much. Keep up the great work.
Hi, my name is Afshin. I'm the Director of Core Capacity at Google, where we support some of our key products such as Google Maps, Google Photos, Google Search, and many more. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're managing the supply and demand for our products in the resource space. So specifically, compute, storage, machine learning, and networking resources. Ultimately, our goal is to provide the fuel for these products so we can support our billions of users. I often look at establishing the project goals, and tied to the goals is discussing the criteria. What's a successful project? What are the measurables involved in the project space? And then lastly, I always want to look at the stakeholders that are involved, maybe our clients, our key stakeholders, and so on, and make sure that they're thought of during the formation of the project. I'm meeting with the stakeholders. I'm trying to understand what they're trying to achieve, what we're trying to achieve, and the goal, if you will, is a critical aspect of setting the scope. When I'm trying to set the goals of a project, I apply very in-depth active listening. I'm doing a lot of socializing with stakeholders. I'm meeting a lot of players to understand what's the landscape like. I really am, it's an active listening experience. So I have a recent example of a project that in my view did not do the proper initiation phase. Last week, in fact, a group approached me with a process or a feature that they were going to launch. I reviewed it and immediately realized that they were so far off. They had not discussed the topic with any of my team members or myself, and they were day -1 from launching the feature. It was a total miss. And it really illustrates the point about when you initiate a project, you can't invest enough time in meeting with stakeholders, meeting with your colleagues, listening to them, actively listening. Someone taught me recently the value of building that listening to learn muscle. And in the project initiation phase, to me, that is such a valuable talent. There are those that have it, there are those that haven't learned it, and there are those that will never do it. And I believe it's a trainable skill, but it requires you to really slow down and look at the landscape in front of you.
Nice work. You're on your way to becoming a great candidate for roles in project management. We're so glad you've stuck with us, and we hope you're proud of the progress you've made so far. In the last few videos, we've given you a primer on kicking off a project successfully. To recap, you learn more about initiation, the first phase of the project lifecycle. Hopefully, you're starting to see how important this phase is for the overall health of a project. As we talked about earlier, a lack of preparation during the initiation stage can lead to problems later on in the project lifecycle, like a budget shortage, a missed deadline, or too few teammates to complete the work. But with early planning, you can set your team up for success. We also introduce you to the major factors you should consider during the initiation phase, including goals, scope, deliverables, success criteria, stakeholders, and resources. All of these come together in the early plans for a project and are documented in a project charter. Now that you understand the basic elements of initiation, let's dive deeper. Next up, we'll talk about identifying goals and deliverables and learn more about measurement and success criteria. You're doing great, and we'll see you soon.
Alright, so that's the intro for the first phase of project management lifecycle, which is the initiation phase. From a engineer perspective, usually when a project it is initiated, what we really need to do as our role is, I think, first to understand the goal of the project. Right, let's say a project was initiated, and then what people are trying to achieve is doing A. But then you somehow don't really understand what's going on and just assign a task. Then by the time you complete the task, you may realize that, hey, you're actually working something that is not really delivering any value to that goal A. Instead, it might be for another goal, or you just get sidetracked by some distractions. Also, in the planning phase, I think I've briefly mentioned, by better understanding the goal, sometimes engineers can come up with creative methods that could either save budget or save time. It may not be as perfect as a originally designed method, but if it still can achieve the goal, sometimes it may make sense to go with more resource efficient methods. So that's the importance of the goal, and then by clearly defining the goal and understanding the goal, it really is help the project team to be on the same page and work towards the same direction. And then the second major thing in the initiation phase, of course, figuring out the scope. It's kind of part of understanding goal, right? Because the scope is pretty much defined by the goal. In order to achieve that, we want to do this, and by defining what to do to achieve that goal, that is the scope of the project. So that's if we summarize it, that's the first thing, to understand the goal and scope, and then clarify that. And the second important thing would be to communicate from the engineer perspective, like, is this goal or is this scope feasible? Is this timeline feasible? Or giving input like what kind of resource we need. We may need, purchase X amount of server, which then in turn means we need X amount of budget, or maybe we need some services that might be difficult to come by, or could simply mean that in order to fit the timeline, we probably need X amount of engineers to work together on this task so that we can deliver it on time. Also keep in mind, during the initiation phase, it's usually just a rough estimate. Like we've mentioned, like in the very beginning of this course, many of the IT projects, especially the one that follows the waterfall, the more of the traditional project lifecycle, end up with over budgeted or delayed. Sometimes straight out failed. That never gets delivered. So so here we're talking about so there is some risk going on, and we've said it a couple of times. Human beings are just bad at estimation, and then programmers are usually too optimal on their estimate. But that's aside. That's basically risks, right? And we will talk about risks later. So that aside, the value of project initiation, right? You may ask then why should we still plan it? Why should we still estimate, during the initiation phase? But you should know that it's still better than nothing, right? Without a rough estimate, you're basically assuming there's gonna be risk in the and very likely a project without any planning, any initiation, any scoping, it's just gonna like it's either gonna deliver you something that's not really going to meet the goal, or it's just gonna take much longer than the initial timeline, or it will just require a huge amount of additional resource to be put in. So even though we admit that there's risk involved, but that doesn't mean we could easily say, oh, then we just throw away that, we skip planning, we skip initiation. Same thing when we talk about gospel, right? We don't say, hey, now is the era of grace and mercy and the Holy Spirit, then we don't need the law. We don't say that, right? We still value law, and we still value all these great spiritual practices. We still value some of those rituals, right? Because there's still a meaning, there's still an importance in those things. So same here. Even though we talk about agile a lot, and we talk about, hey, we have to embrace risks, and hey, we have to admit the fact that we're bad at estimation, but that doesn't mean planning and initiation is not important, and we can just completely throw it away. So here, I just want to emphasize that during the initial phase, for the engineer, the role, of course, understand the goal, clarify the scope, but also making some rough estimation so that the stakeholders, the other stakeholders, or the product owner can have a rough understanding of what this project entails, like what resources will need to be pulled into this project, to have a fair understanding of that. That's still important. Yeah. So okay. So that's about project initiation, and typically what we're looking at in terms of our role. Okay. Next we will talk about project planning. Let's move on.
Hello, welcome to this course called Planning, Putting It All Together. If you've already completed our previous courses, then you have a great foundation for what it takes to initiate a project and kick off the planning phase. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Rowena, and I'll be your instructor for this course. I work as a senior program manager in Google Cloud on a variety of projects. I mostly focus on systems and productivity enhancements for my team, which consists of around 100 full-time employees and more than 300 contractors around the world. Some of the larger scale projects that I work on impact Google Cloud's sales and global sales support teams, which are made up of thousands of people. But I didn't start out building solutions for thousands of people at a global company. I left school at the age of 17 with no college degree and no real plan. Before Google, I worked in retail, hospitality, and even in the airline industry as a crew member. When I joined the corporate world, I noticed something. The processes were just as messy as the stockrooms of the retail stores where I'd worked. There was so much room to improve. I came to realize that every business is complicated and that there's always room to create order. So I started thinking about ways to automate my day-to-day tasks. I was emailing ideas to my manager and colleagues, working with teams across the company, brainstorming solutions to problems, coordinating training for my coworkers, and so much more. That's when it became clear I was project managing. I transferred into a role focused entirely on program management at Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California. In my job interview, I focused on examples of how I applied these transferable skills from my previous roles and how I could leverage the knowledge I gained from my experience. 4 years later, I'm here and I'm so excited to be partnering with you on this learning journey. From the outside, big global companies can seem as though they have it all figured out, but there's always room for new processes, and you likely have the skills and insights from your previous experiences that can be useful. So keep going, you're heading in the right direction. This course is focused on the planning phase. I'll share the tools and techniques to complete this phase. First up, I'll demonstrate how to kick off the planning phase. Then we'll explore the importance of setting and reaching milestones. For every milestone, there'll be a set of tasks to complete. So I'll teach you some tips for breaking down and distributing the workload. Later, we'll discuss the budget and how the overall budgeting process works. We'll learn about people or companies outside of your organization that may play a role in determining the budget. And we'll discuss the importance of sufficiently documenting your budget. Then, we'll discuss the various risks and the possible impact those risks can have on the project. Nothing ever goes quite as planned, but risk management is a great way to make sure you know what could go wrong and how you'll address it. This includes communicating possible risks to your stakeholders, creating a mitigation plan, and then keeping an eye on those risks to make sure they don't stall your projects. Last but not least, documentation ties it all together. Keeping all your project plans documented and organized not only helps you, but it also helps those involved knowing their responsibilities. Documentation also provides stakeholders with a window into the development of the project. It has always been important to the success of my own projects at Google, and I'm excited to explore this topic with you. Ready to get started? Meet you in the next video. Hi again. In the previous course, you learned about the initiation phase. During the initiation phase, the project manager is gathering all of the necessary preliminary information needed to get stakeholder approval and plan the project. A few key things need to happen during this time. First, the project manager gets assigned. That's you. Then, the goals of the project have to be approved, as well as the scope of the project and its deliverables. A number of people will need to be assigned to the project, and you'll have a good sense of their individual roles and responsibilities. You'll also need stakeholder sign-off on your project charter. If all of these criteria have been met, then you're set to begin planning. Planning is a significant part of ensuring a project's success. So let's take some time to discuss why it's so important. Planning is important for any project, large or small. While planning your project, you and other members of the team will determine the processes and workflows needed to meet your goals and put together ideas about how to make the project a success. While planning, you might draw from previous project experience, but don't be afraid to think of new ways to get results. Every project is different, so new and different approaches may be just the thing you need. Planning has many benefits. As we've discussed, planning helps you map out the full project. It helps you understand the work needed to achieve your goals. Planning also helps coordinate efforts and timelines with other teams, contractors, and vendors. Another huge benefit of planning is that it gives you time to identify and prepare for risks that could impact your project. Those might include things like a delay in the timeline, the departure of a critical team member, or a change in project direction from a primary stakeholder. Planning also gives you the chance to brainstorm ways to mitigate or address those risks. There are less obvious benefits too. For example, the planning phase can help you get buy-in from key members of the project team. Getting buy-in means that you've gained their support for your plans. Planning also demonstrates to stakeholders that the team is taking care to start the project with a detailed plan. But one of the most significant benefits of planning is teamwork, which will help you push your project across the finish line. By working together in the planning phase, individuals assigned to the project can become a strong team by the time the planning is done and the work is about to start. Planning together creates a shared understanding among all parties involved in the project. So, to recap, planning has many benefits, from helping the team to understand the work needed to achieve their goals to providing project plans to the stakeholders. Now that you know a bit more about planning, we'll learn how to launch the planning phase. Meet you in the next video. Hello again. In the last video, we discussed the importance of planning. Now, let's get into the details of how to launch the planning phase. As you learned earlier, the planning phase is the second phase of a project's life cycle. This can be a challenging time for a project manager because there's so much to consider. But it's important to know that project plans don't have to be perfect the very first time. And even if you do a great job with your plans the first time around, it's likely that the plan will change as the project evolves. The planning phase may differ from project to project, but generally 3 big things are worked out during this stage: the schedule, the budget, and the risk management plan. We'll discuss each of these in greater detail later on in the course. But for now, here's some general information so you can understand why these 3 elements are so crucial to planning. Let's start with the schedule. The schedule is basically a timeline of the project. It includes the start date, the end date, and the dates for things that will happen in between. You'll use time estimation techniques to determine these dates. Let's imagine scheduling in our example project at Office Green. As a reminder, you're the lead project manager for Project Plant Pals, a new service that will provide top clients with desk-friendly plants. You want to launch the service by the end of the year, so the planning phase for this effort should include a number of key dates. Those dates might include when you'll request proposals from plant vendors. They might also include the date you'll kick off with the web designers and developers who are creating a new website for the service. It should also include important dates during the project execution phase, like when the plants need to be ready for delivery, or when the new web page design needs to be approved. And you'll need to include the target date for the launch of the service. Another part of the planning phase is setting the budget. The budget will account for the total cost to complete the project. The total cost needs to be broken down to determine how much has to be spent on different elements of the project. For Project Plant Pals, the budget will need to include items like the cost of designing and launching a web page, the cost of hiring your plant vendor, and much more. The third component of the planning phase is risk management, which means searching for possible problems and planning ahead to mitigate these risks. Let's face it, risk is inevitable in every project. What's not inevitable is how the risk impacts your project. Good project planning means searching for places where trouble might occur. Where might the schedule get off track? Where might the budgets exceed your estimates? You'll work with your team to consider answers to these questions and prepare a risk management plan based on whatever you discover. Let's go back to the office screen example. While putting together the initial schedule, you may realize that your estimates from your developers put you way beyond your launch date. To manage that risk, you might try to reduce or adjust the project scope to still meet your deadline, or even negotiate a new launch date with your stakeholders. These are two simple examples of how you might mitigate a scheduling risk. So, to recap, you'll spend the planning phase building your schedule, setting your budget, and preparing your risk management plan. But first, you need to get the whole team on board. Next, we'll discuss the project kickoff meeting, which is where the project really gets going. Meet you there. Hello again. In this video, you'll learn how to schedule a kickoff meeting once you're ready to shift into planning mode. It's important to schedule a meeting that will serve as a formal start to project planning. You might be wondering what a kickoff meeting is and how it differs from other types of meetings. That's a great question. A project kickoff meeting is the first meeting in which a project team comes together to ground everyone in a shared vision, gain a shared understanding of the project's goals and scope, and to understand each person's individual roles within the team. So, who's invited to the kickoff meeting? Well, that would be the team members identified in a RACI chart created during the initiation phase. As a reminder, a RACI chart helps to define roles and responsibilities for individuals or teams to ensure that the work gets done efficiently. During the kickoff meeting, team members will learn more about how they'll contribute to the project and how they'll gain a deeper understanding of how the team will work together to reach the project's goals. You should also invite your stakeholders and your sponsor to the meeting so that they have a chance to understand the high-level plan for the project, can share their perspective, and you can ensure that everyone is on the same page. Now, you might be wondering, why do I need a kickoff meeting? Can't my team learn everything they need to know from the project charter? We get it. Meetings can be time-consuming, and there are definitely situations when a quick email or a chat to a teammate will suffice. But when you're kicking off a project, especially larger projects with multiple people involved, it's important to get together to establish a shared vision, align on the scope, and build team rapport. This is also an opportunity for teammates to ask questions and offer insights. And it's a great time for you to set expectations with the team about how each person will individually contribute to the project. Now, let's discuss how to plan and run a kickoff meeting. There are lots of templates for kickoff meeting agendas online, but most follow a similar structure and last about an hour. Keep in mind that this is just a suggestion, and you should feel free to schedule as much or as little time for each agenda item according to the needs of your project and the team. Most meetings start with brief introductions. You can allocate about 10 minutes for everyone in the group to introduce themselves and their roles, and if time allows, share a fun fact to help build team rapport. Then you'll spend about 5 minutes giving an overview of the background of the project. This covers details like how the project came to be and why the project matters. You'll also use this time to set a shared vision. Next, spend about 5 minutes sharing the goals and the scope, which refers to the boundaries around a project. That includes making it clear what work is considered in scope and what work is considered out of scope. This is also a good place to share the target launch date and highlight any important milestones the team need to be aware of. Once you've covered goals and scope, it's time to discuss everyone's roles. It's a good idea to spend about 5 minutes making sure that everyone is clear on what work they'll be responsible for throughout the duration of the project. Next, it's time to address collaboration, which is how the team will work together on the project. This is a great time to go over tools that will serve as a communal source of information for the team, like a project plan created in a spreadsheet or a work management software tool like Asana. It's also a great time to determine how the team will communicate with one another, like through daily email updates, a team chat room, and weekly team check-in meetings. You should spend about 10 minutes on this topic. When that's all set, it's time to discuss what comes next. Now that you've discussed the details of the project thus far, you should spend about 10 minutes setting expectations with your teammates for what's coming up. You'll also use this time to make clear to each teammate what actions they'll need to take next. Finally, it's really important to set aside about 15 minutes for questions from the group. This is your team's chance to gain clarity on any of the topics you've discussed so far. It's also your chance to hear from the team and ensure that the project is benefiting from diversity of thoughts, experiences, and ideas. For example, in addition to fielding questions out loud in the meeting, I might invite teammates to input their questions or feedback in a shared document. This practice can help create space for collaboration. I also like to poll my teammates for confidence on the topics discussed that day. I ask what their confidence level is on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, I'm not confident at all, and 5 being, I'm extremely confident. If they're not confident, I ask them what I can do to help change that. This practice can give the team a stronger sense of support because they know I'm there to help them through roadblocks. If you try this practice in your meetings, be sure to deliver on any promises you make there. Your reputation as a project manager to get things done and remove roadblocks is critical to building and maintaining relationships. So, to recap, the kickoff meeting will cover introductions, project background, goals and scope, roles, collaboration, and what comes next. And the meeting will leave time for questions from the group at the end. Once you've finalized the meeting agenda, document this information into a meeting agenda template and send it to attendees a day or two ahead of the meeting. As the project manager, you'll be leading the majority of this meeting. And when you're presenting, it's difficult to take notes and present at the same time. So, at the start of the meeting, ask a teammate to take notes on key points you discussed throughout the session and to record each teammate's action items. In some cases, it may be beneficial to record this meeting so that attendees can revisit it later, especially if you have a large or dispersed team. Just be sure to get each attendee's permission to record ahead of time. After the meeting, don't forget to send a follow-up email to the group summarizing key points and outcomes from the meeting, as well as any action items to the attendees. In your follow-up email, be sure to also invite attendees to reach out if they have any additional questions. While there's a lot that goes into the kickoff meeting, remember that this is an exciting moment for the team, and especially for you as the project manager. All of the careful thinking and hard work that you've done during the initiation phase comes together to form the foundation of your project. Coming up, we'll learn about milestones, tasks, and how they differ. Meet you in the next video. Hi again. As we've discussed throughout this program, the project manager is responsible for assigning work to the team and keeping track of the project's progress. When we discuss assigning work, we'll use a few key terms: project milestones and project tasks. Let's break these down. A project milestone is an important point within the project schedule that indicates progress and usually signifies the completion of a deliverable or phase of the project. These are significant checkpoints in your project, and keeping track of them helps ensure that your project is on schedule to meet its goals. For example, a milestone might include completing the first draft of a report, and the goal may be to ultimately publish the report. Another example of a milestone is receiving sign-off or approval from your customer on a major deliverable. Let's discuss how milestones differ from project tasks. A project task is an activity that needs to be accomplished within a set period of time. The work of a project is broken down into many different tasks. In order to reach a milestone, you and your team must complete multiple tasks. For example, if a milestone is completing the first draft of a report, the tasks required to get to that milestone might include hiring a writer, conducting research, and drafting different sections of the report. Let's imagine milestones and tasks in the context of Project Plant Pals at Office Green. One of your project deliverables is to launch a website for your new service, where customers will be able to place orders and get customer support. Some of the milestones leading up to that launch will include securing approval on the website design and implementing feedback from user testing. To achieve those milestones, your team needs to complete multiple project tasks. For example, in order to reach the design milestone, Your website designer will need to create initial mock-ups of the proposed website design. You'll need to review those mock-ups, and the designer will need to implement your feedback. Each of these items is a project task, and you won't reach your milestone until they're complete. To review, milestones are important points within the project schedule, and project tasks are activities that need to be accomplished within a set period of time to help reach those milestones. Milestones and project tasks are interconnected. Tasks ladder up to milestones, which are crucial for project tracking. Now that you know more about milestones, project tasks, and how the two differ, we'll learn more about the importance of milestones in the next video. I'll meet you there. Great to see you again. So you've learned that a milestone is an important point within the project schedule that highlights progress and usually marks the completion of a deliverable or phase in the project. But now, let's talk about why setting milestones within your project is so important. While it might seem tempting to make a quick to-do list and get on with the project, it's really important that you take the time and effort to break your project down piece by piece. Here's why. First, setting milestones gives you a clear understanding of the amount of work your project will require. The act of setting milestones forces you to break your project down into more manageable chunks. The further you go, the better you'll be able to see how much work will be needed to meet the project goals. At first glance, it might seem simple to launch a new website, but it might be more work than you think. And if you break that deliverable down into milestones, and those milestones into tasks, you'll have a better sense of the true amount of work that needs to be done. This will help you better manage the project workload. Another reason milestones are so great is that they can help keep your project on track. When you set a milestone, you assign clear deadlines for when certain project deliverables need to be completed. Then, as you work through the execution phase, you can look back at these deadlines to make sure that the project is progressing at the right pace. A third reason you'll want to set milestones is that they help you uncover areas where you might need to adjust scope, timelines, or resources to meet your goals. For example, if you realize that reaching a milestone will require more tasks than you'd anticipated, you might ask a stakeholder for permission to reduce the scope of the project and cut down on the number of tasks. And finally, there's one more reason milestones are so important. Actually reaching milestones can seriously motivate your team and illustrate real progress to your stakeholders. With big projects that go on for months, you'll want to keep the team's motivation high. A milestone signifies the completion of an important chunk of work and provides a moment of celebration for the team, even if there's more work ahead. Milestones also serve as a great check-in point to highlight your progress to stakeholders. It gives them the opportunity to see the work that's been completed so far and lets them see everything is on track and up to their standards. It's also important to remember that milestones must be completed on time and in sequential order, because usually reaching the next milestone is dependent on completing a previous milestone. Think about this in terms of Project Plant Powers at Office Green. As we discussed earlier, in order to launch a website for a new plant service, there are a few milestones you need to hit, like securing approval of a website design, completing development of the website, and implementing user feedback. These milestones must happen in this order. Here's why. The web developer can't build the website if the design hasn't been approved by stakeholders, and you can't implement feedback from user testing if there's no website to test. So we know it's important to reach milestones in sequential order, but it's just as important that you reach them on time. If the team misses the mark to complete a deliverable tied to a specific milestone, it could set back your project schedule, meaning your team might need to work overtime or add additional resources to catch up. For example, if you need to secure stakeholder approval on a website design by Friday, but the web designer hasn't completed the design yet, you might have to wait until after the weekend to secure stakeholder approval. This will delay the start of the development phase, giving your team less time to build the website. Even worse, This delay could affect the project budget if completing this deliverable directly ties to a payment from the client. If you miss the deadline, you'll likely delay receipt of that payment. You might even risk losing the payment altogether. Though deadlines are sometimes flexible, it's important to be extra mindful of milestones where the deadline is non-negotiable. And that's that. Hopefully you understand why milestones are important to any project. Coming up, we'll discuss how to set milestones for your project. See you there. Hi again. Okay, so you know that milestones are pretty important. They help give you a clear picture of the amount of work required. They help your project stay on track, uncover areas where you might need additional resources, motivate your teammates, and show progress to your stakeholders. So now, let's talk about identifying milestones within your project and how you can set deadlines for each one. The first step to setting a milestone is to evaluate your project as a whole. It helps to refer back to your project charter to remind yourself of the project goal. Then, make a list of what your team needs to do to achieve that goal. The big items that indicate progress are your milestones. These are the key points within the project schedule that signify the completion of a project deliverable or a phase in the project. Smaller items, like any item that a stakeholder wouldn't need to review, for example, are tasks. You'll plan for these once you've separated them out from the milestones. So let's go back to our Office Green example. One of the project deliverables is a new website. And as we determined earlier, some milestones for our Office Green website scenario include securing approval of website design, completing development of the website, and implementing user feedback. Mocking up initial designs or building a landing page are smaller items on your list, so those are marked as tasks. Try to keep in mind that some projects might have many milestones, while others might just have 2 or 3. There's no one right number of milestones to set. The number will vary from project to project. Once you've determined your milestones, the next step is to assign each one a deadline. Reaching each of your milestones is dependent on the completion of multiple project tasks. So to make sure you give your team a fair amount of time to complete each of those tasks, you'll need to space your milestones out accordingly. For a larger, months-long project, like Project Plant Pals, you shouldn't expect to meet multiple milestones in the span of a week. Mocking up website designs and collecting insights from user testing are big tasks that take time. You need to space milestones out to give your team room to complete their work. To get a good sense of timing, you can connect with teammates to discuss the tasks required to reach each milestone and get their estimates for how long these tasks will take. With those estimates in mind, you can make an informed decision about reasonable deadlines for each milestone. When you set deadlines for milestones, you'll also want to consider the needs of your stakeholders. Ask yourself when they'll expect to see a certain project deliverable, and consider the answer when choosing a deadline. Your stakeholders will want to see regular indications that the team is making progress, and milestones are a great way to show that progress. So to recap, you set milestones by looking at your project as a whole and pulling out important checkpoints that show progress. Then you assign deadlines to each milestone while keeping the needs of your stakeholders top of mind. Next up, we'll discuss a helpful tool for breaking down the tasks that ladder up to each milestone. See you there. So we've discussed how to set milestones. Now we'll learn how to account for the many tasks that ladder up to each milestone. You can do this by creating a work breakdown structure. Let's start with a definition. A work breakdown structure, often abbreviated to WBS, is a tool that sorts the milestones and tasks of a project in a hierarchy in the order they need to be completed. This is a helpful tool because it helps break down the sometimes intimidating challenges of a project into more manageable chunks. Big projects like publishing a report or organizing a conference seem a lot less daunting when the work required to get there is broken down step by step with a clear pathway from the beginning of the project to the end. Let's look at an example of a basic work breakdown structure. There are lots of different ways to design a work breakdown structure, but one common way is to create a tree diagram of project tasks. Let's say that we're creating a work breakdown structure for the Project Plant Pals website launch. At the top of the diagram is the name of the project. The second level of our diagram breaks the project down into 3 milestones. These include securing design approval, developing the site, and implementing user feedback. At the third level of the chart, we can see each of those milestones gets further broken down into a series of project tasks. For example, tasks listed beneath your design approval milestone include mocking up designs and collecting feedback. This is a very simple example of a work breakdown structure. Here, we've only created a work breakdown structure for a new website, which is just one of the Project Plant Pals deliverables. Keep in mind that in future project management roles, you'll likely create a WBS that outlines the tasks for an entire project. It's also important to note that while creating a work breakdown structure is a helpful exercise for visualizing the tasks of a project, you wouldn't typically include this type of diagram in your official project plan. Instead, you'd input the tasks identified through this exercise into a spreadsheet or your chosen work management software, where you can more easily assign owners to each task. Okay, so after completing a work breakdown structure and organizing those tasks in a spreadsheet, a few things should be clearer to you. First, you should have a set of discrete project tasks that ladder up to each of your milestones. You and your teammates will know exactly what needs to happen to reach your first milestone, and the milestones after that. Second, you're now in a good position to assign those tasks to members of the project team. Each person should have a clear understanding of the tasks they own and the order in which they need to complete them. Let's break down how to assign tasks. Tasks are typically assigned according to a person's role in the project. For example, in our office green scenario, the web designer is assigned to the task of mocking up the initial website design. You are assigned to the task of reviewing that design and providing feedback. And the designer is assigned to the task of implementing your feedback. A web developer will be assigned to the next task of developing the site itself. Sometimes your team will have multiple teammates working in the same type of role. To assign tasks between 2 or more team members with the same roles, you might take into consideration each person's familiarity with the tasks at hand. For example, if you have multiple web developers working on the new website, you might task one developer with creating the landing page and task the other developer with creating the Contact Us page. When assigning tasks, you should also consider each teammate's workload. Think about how much time they're meant to be spending on the project, compared to work outside the project that they might also be responsible for. It's important to keep everyone's workloads balanced. You'll want to make sure that a single teammate isn't assigned more work than others. You'll also want to make sure that no one is assigned more work than they can handle. When people feel overloaded, the quality of their work may suffer, or they might need more time to complete the number of tasks, putting the timeline and the overall project schedule at risk. As the project manager, you'll ensure that your teammates are clear on their assigned tasks. You can do this by assigning tasks with help from project management tools, like Asana, which I use a lot in my day-to-day role at Google. When you manage a project in Asana, you'll add tasks to represent actionable pieces of work needed to complete the project. As a best practice, it's good to start each task with a verb. For example, instead of just typing website, make clear the task is to mock up the website or add images to the website. Another thing to think about when assigning tasks is timeline. Be sure to add an assignee and a due date to each task so it's clear who's doing what by when. Finally, be sure to include as much detail surrounding the task as possible to avoid miscommunication. In Asana, you can click into the task details to add helpful information. Here, you can add a description, link to corresponding files or attachments, or even comment on the work related to the task. There's so many benefits to assigning tasks, but the biggest one is that it frees you up to focus on managing the project. This way, you can feel confident in the knowledge that your teammates are responsible for specific work. But there's also some less obvious benefits of assigning tasks. Let's explore these more now. One less obvious benefit of assigning tasks is that it creates a sense of personal responsibility for members of the team. When you assign a teammate to a task, you enter into an agreement with that person that they'll own the task until it's completed. Creating a sense of ownership for members of the team is important because it makes them feel more invested in the project. It also gives them space for personal growth. Plus, it supports your own skill building as a manager who's a supportive delegator. And on top of that, it keeps your team motivated and invested in completing their work on time. And while each team member should have a sense of responsibility for their assigned task, a complete sense of ownership might feel overwhelming for some teammates. If that's the case, it's a good idea for a project manager to encourage teammates to support one another on their tasks. This is also great for building overall team rapport. Got all that? Great. So to recap, you've learned about work breakdown structures and how to assign tasks to people on your team. Meet us in the next video for a recap on what we've covered over the past few videos. Hi again. Over the past few videos, we've discussed how to launch the planning phase of the project lifecycle. This is where you'll build your schedule, set your budget, and prepare your risk management plan. You also learned about an important part of the planning phase, the project kickoff meeting. This is a key moment where you can meet with your team and stakeholders to establish a shared vision, align on scope, build rapport, ask questions, and set expectations. We also discussed milestones, which are important points within the project schedule that indicate progress. And we also learned about tasks, which are activities that need to be accomplished within a set period of time. Then you learned about the value of milestones and how to set them. And you learned how to take those milestones, break them down into tasks, and record that information in a work breakdown structure. Next, we'll explore estimating time and setting a schedule. See you soon.
So what are the problems that we need to solve? When you look at planning for projects, it's critical to understanding what you're building, who you're building for, and how long you have to build it. We look at our risk to make sure that we know what potentially could derail the project, and if possible, create mitigation that will circumvent any risks that we may come in contact with, or just be aware of things like scope. We also look at timing. Is there a deadline that we need to hit? And if so, do we have enough time to hit that deadline? We assess the work that needs to be done to understand if the work that needs to be done in order to meet the requirements fits into the timeline that we have. We also look at testing, what the testing plan looks like, what is success going to look like, so we know what the target is, so that when we hit the target and we validate it, we already know what metrics we expect to get. I'm a planner, it's just in my nature. Planning sets a tone for what we're actually doing together. It creates a sense of team. The planning also aligns everybody to understanding what it is we're all shooting for, what it is our goals are, what success is going to look like. It really is the place where we come together to ensure that we're all on the same page and we're all going in the same direction. When you don't have that, things get lost. You're not talking to the right people. You have miscommunications. Things get delayed and you don't really understand why. People aren't comfortable communicating what progress is happening. They really aren't comfortable in communicating when their problem comes up. So you want to just set a tone of we're all in this together. We're all going to be successful together. And we are going to run into roadblocks. We are going to run into problems, but we're going to work it out and figure it out as a team.
All right, so that's about it for planning. So primarily for planning, it's just sort of a extension of initiation phase, where we already have a fair understanding of the goal, and then define the scope, and have some rough estimation of the resources, including budget, team member, timeline, stuff like that. So during planning, it's really to figure out more details, to verify that scope is correct. Is there more stuff to be specified? Is there some hidden requirements that we haven't figured out yet? Also for the estimation, we break down all the milestones. We break down the work into milestones, and then further break down the milestones into each piece, multiple pieces of tasks, and figure out the dependencies, and then figure out who to assign, and get the timeline mapped out. All right, so that's the big picture of this planning phase, but also it's a phase where everything, all the information's the goal, the scope, the tasks, team members, the timeline. Basically, we want to inform everybody that's involved in the project of this information. Okay, and then for engineers during this phase, I think the primary role is to be involved in the communication. I think I've observed a few developers that are pretty passive, I would say, during these phases. You know, the attitude is basically, all right, just tell me what I need to do, and I'll just do that. You'll probably you will encounter some programmer like that during your career. Personal advice: try not to do that. I understand sometimes people feel difficult, and then especially developers, I think on average, we don't do very well in terms of communication. And then when when we feel frustrated, and we tend to just give up on communicating and just go passively and do whatever we could do. I can understand, and I would say sometimes I might even do that myself. But I think to be a great engineer, a great programmer, it's really important to be active in terms of communication. And then when we talk about planning, the planning phase, then I'm saying like being active in the kickoff meeting, you know, right? If you get a question, just ask away. Like if you think the scope, the requirement is not clear enough, you need to further clarify that. Just spell it out, right? And if you see some risk, right? Hey, I understand the goal, and I understand this. We really need to launch this feature, but hey, this feature is really too cutting edge, or you know, or just nobody on the team has any experience with that technology. Then also speak up and make sure everybody is on the same page. Otherwise, those will become a hidden risk. And then maybe there's some other way that's not necessarily a technical way, but some other way that can help mitigate this kind of risk, right? Maybe on the business side, we can launch with an alternative solution that can still somehow deliver some value to the customer. Then that might be the thing that we should do when the initial plan didn't work out. So you know, with that we can have a backup plan, or something like that. So yeah, I think it is, especially during planning phase, it's really, really important for engineers to be involved in the communication. And then when it's time to, you know, figure out the work breakdown structure, also that's something not just applicable for a project that's managed by a team, but also even for a one-man team. Usually, at least there's your boss and yourself working on a project. Sometimes that happens as well, but also that the same thing can be applied to that situation, right? You still need to communicate with your boss effectively and try to, bring up your ideas, and make sure everything is well communicated and your understanding is correct. You need to make sure of that, but also you still need to build out that work breakdown structure. Engineering or programming is all about divide and conquer, right? When you write a program, you divide the problem and conquer it one by one. Same thing when you do a project, you break down into milestones, break down into tasks, and so you can manage your timeline well, even if that's just yourself. But it's more important when it's a team working on that, and then everybody has some sort of dependency. Then for us engineer, to clarify all the scopes and come up with more accurate estimates. Of course, we've introduced to some other methodology, like using the pivotal tracker. Pivotal tracker is sort of a twist to work breakdown structure, right? Where you just break down the project into tasks, and then you make estimate using the point velocity of the point system. Similar idea here. By breaking down the tasks, you have a better understanding of each thing that needs to happen. Then you can make better estimates based on that. So our role, engineer's role, is usually be involved in developing this work breakdown and clearly defining all the tasks. Sometimes tasks are defined by someone else, but we also have to give our input and clarify things and correct things. And then also based on our feedback, sometimes tasks can be rescheduled, can have different priorities, can be prioritized differently. All those things can happen. So I would say that's usually our role in this phase. And also what the last video, what was that about the last one? Anyway, in one of the videos, it was mentioned that creating a ownership, a sense of ownership and a sense of team, right? Feeling like, hey, I'm running this project, and then if it's successful, I'm part of the success there. And also, if I have a problem, then the entire team is on board. It's not just gonna be my own problem. Also, I'll say sometimes you would get into a toxic environment. Sometimes the culture of a team may be toxic. It'll be sometimes it goes like that. It's like, hey, it's your responsibility. You go fix it. And I don't care. Or people can kick balls and stuff like that. But and then blame each other. It's just the sinful nature of human being. Okay. And sometimes that happens, and then we may not be able to do anything about that. But still, even in that environment, is still, as a team member, I think we should try our best to create that sense of team. And also, even if that means exposing our vulnerabilities, that means, hey, we hit a roadblock that, hey, we face some challenges, we face some difficulty. I think it's still important to bring it up and discuss with the team. And then you never know, something that's completely out of your knowledge can help that, or so that's about planning. To sum up, is really try to actively be involved, and then try our best to communicate and help with making estimates and defining all the work breakdowns, and then being part of the team. All right, last we will talk about project execution.
Hi there! If you've gone through our previous courses, you've spent a lot of time digging into the intricacies and significance of setting up a project for success. And now, we're at the project execution stage, where all of that hard work comes together. If you haven't gone through our previous courses yet, we recommend checking them out. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name's Elita, and I'll be your instructor for this course. I work as a Senior Engineering Program Manager at Google, where I currently lead the team behind routing and navigation on Google Maps. I joined the company in 2007, working on teams across Google's engineering organization in New York, London, and Seattle. And in 2013, I joined the Google Maps team and launched popular features like holiday hours and attributes on businesses, while leading global teams from New York to Sydney to Hyderabad. Generally, I like solving problems and learning new things. Every new project and team allows me to do both. I'm excited to lead you through this course and demonstrate how to put a project plan into action. First up, you'll learn more about risks and unforeseen changes to the project. If you've taken our previous courses, you might recall that change is inevitable. And to combat that, we've covered the concept of risk mitigation during the planning phase. And now we'll take it one step further and discuss what to do when a risk actually materializes. Next, I'll discuss tracking and quality. You'll learn how to track and measure your project's progress, and you'll learn how to use continuous improvement and quality management techniques to keep the project on track and running smoothly. These best practices are valuable to just about any role, and I'm looking forward to taking you through them. Other big aspects of running a project include decision-making. You'll learn to both use and analyze data to inform your decision-making, and then, in turn, use that data to explore and explain key aspects of your project. I'll also discuss team management and the fundamentals of influencing. So much of the success of a project relies on teamwork, and you'll learn more about how you, as a project manager, can effectively lead your team to the finish line. Speaking of teamwork, I'll share some of the tools that provide effective team communication, along with tips for organizing and facilitating meetings. And then, we'll wrap up by discussing how to close a project. You'll learn the steps required to finish a project and the importance of celebrating a job well done with your team. Sounds kind of fun, right? After all that planning, this is the point in the project lifecycle where work gets done and everything comes together. Ready to get started? Meet me in the next video where you'll learn about the importance of tracking and measuring project progress. Hi again. In previous courses, we've discussed the importance of breaking your project down into milestones and tasks, and assigning those tasks to different members of your team. We've also discussed setting a schedule and budget. But once the project execution phase gets going, how do you actually know that the work is getting done? Well, you can do this in a few ways, but primarily, you can keep tabs on project progress by tracking and measurement. This is actually a big part of project management. Tracking, by definition, is a method of following the progress of a project's activities. Measuring project performance regularly to identify deviations from the project plan can help ensure that the project stays on track. A deviation is anything that alters your original course of action. Deviations from the project plan can be positive or negative. Are you ahead of schedule because a technical problem is less complex than you estimated? Thumbs up. Did a natural disaster shut down your testing team? Big thumbs down. Both of these are examples of deviations. They're also examples of why tracking is such a crucial part of your role during the project execution phase. Let's examine some of the ways that tracking is beneficial for your project's success. To start, tracking makes key project information transparent, and transparency is essential for accurate decision-making. Even the strongest project managers make poor decisions when they lack information or context. Tracking centralizes project information so that everyone can understand the status of each part of the project, which can then help you identify gaps in your knowledge. Also, projects have so many little details, it's hard to keep everything straight. Tracking helps ensure that you don't risk forgetting something. Second, tracking helps keep all team members and stakeholders in touch with deadlines and goals. To ensure that everyone has visibility into project progress, you should have a project plan that works both for you and your team. This way, you're all on the same page about how the project is progressing. You'll learn about different ways to track a project later in this module. Tracking is also crucial for recognizing risks and issues that can derail your progress. With effective tracking, you'll be able to identify issues in a timely fashion and work with your team to take corrective action. By providing visibility into the various parts of the project, tracking helps you and your team identify and focus on areas at risk. And finally, tracking helps build confidence that the project is set to be delivered on time, in scope, and within budget. Having a clear, up-to-date picture of the overall project status keeps the team motivated and focused on staying the course. So to recap, tracking is important for a few key reasons like transparency, risk management, and keeping the project on track. Coming up, we'll take you through some of the key items to track during project execution. Meet you there. So we've discussed that tracking monitors the progress of project activities, but you may still be wondering, what specifically should you be tracking? I'll take you through a few of the most commonly tracked items that I found helpful when managing projects at Google. First, you should always track the project schedule. This is made up of tasks and activities that ensure that the project is effectively heading toward its completion date. After all, your ultimate goal is to complete your deliverables on time. Equally important is tracking the status of action items, key tasks, and activities to ensure that that work is actually getting done. Tracking tasks also helps to track your team's progress toward milestones. We learned a bit more about tracking progress toward milestones earlier in the course, and we stressed the importance of creating tasks and milestones to keep everyone on track. When you're in the middle of a project, new tasks will come up all the time. In order to avoid missing deadlines, it's imperative to track tasks as they progress and as you approach key milestones. Next, you'll also need to track costs to ensure that you don't overspend or underspend on project tasks. As I mentioned earlier, all projects have budgets, and whether or not you're overseeing the entire budget, you may be overseeing tasks and resources that have budget implications. And finally, you'll need to track key decisions, changes, dependencies, and risks to the project, including any agreed upon scope changes. This way, your team and stakeholders are aligned on what needs to be done for the project to succeed. We will cover this in more detail throughout the course since it's a big part of running the project. To recap, the items that are helpful to track throughout the project execution phase include the project schedule, which contain the key tasks and activities, the status of action items, progress toward milestones, costs, and key decisions and changes. There are many moving parts to be aware of once a project is underway. Tracking them closely benefits you and your team as you head toward the project goal. I've taken you through an introduction to tracking, and coming up, we'll discuss project management tools and templates you can use to track project activities. Meet me in the next video to expand your toolkit. Welcome back. Now that you understand how essential tracking is, let's explore and compare various types of tracking methods. The purpose of your project plan is to guide you through the execution of your project. Therefore, it will always include at least one type of tracking method, and sometimes you might use more than one depending on what your team needs. The tracking methods we'll discuss in this video are a Gantt chart, a roadmap, and a burn down chart. There are many others, but these are the few that I'm going to focus on. Whichever type you choose depends on what you deem suitable for your project. It's important to remember to select something that the entire team can easily understand, reference, and keep up to date. Let's compare the tracking methods I mentioned. Perhaps the most common tracking method of all is the Gantt chart. It's a tried and true tool to keep your project on track. A Gantt chart measures tasks against time and includes useful information like who will own each task and what the order of the tasks should be. For this reason, it's a useful chart for staying on schedule and for projects with many dependencies or tasks or activities or milestones that are reliant on one another. It's also a helpful chart for teams with a lot of people because ownership and responsibilities are explicitly laid out visually. As you track and move along sequentially over time, this starts to look like a waterfall, hence why Gantt charts are commonly used in waterfall project management. Each task is represented by a horizontal progress bar, and the length of the bar is dependent on how much time is allotted to the task. The bars are stacked on top of each other to denote that the task at the top must be completed before the next one below it can be completed. Gantt charts typically live in your project plan and are updated as the project progresses. Another common tracking method we have here at Google is a roadmap. A roadmap is best suited for when you need a way to track big milestones in your project. It's useful for illustrating how a project should evolve over time to a team and key stakeholders. Here's an example. A roadmap might list your project's goals at the top and a description of the approach you'll be taking to meet those goals. In this example, the goals are to increase online business-to-consumer sales by 20% year over year and to increase holiday sales to existing customers by 8% over last year. The approach details the main tactics your team will use to reach your goal. A roadmap also includes a high-level project overview. High level in this context means a concise summary, usually 3 to 4 sentences, to clearly state the objectives and priorities for your project. Below the goals, approach, and overview is a table that maps out what the process will entail. In this example, our table is divided into quarters that reflect the project timeline. A quarter is a 3-month period on a company's financial calendar. Key milestones are listed for each quarter. Then there are tasks that each team member or department needs to complete. Most tasks may map to a milestone due within the same quarter. In our example, the project as a whole has a key milestone in Q1 to finalize inventory for the holiday season. The work of product testing and finalizing suggestions for offerings mainly falls to the marketing and sales teams. However, sometimes the tasks may need to be completed in advance to unblock another team or milestone in future quarters. The product and engineering team is working on tasks in Q1 and in Q2 that lead up to the launch of the refreshed online store in Q3. In order to reach that milestone, each department needs to complete specific tasks, and the roadmap tracks both individual and project progress toward milestones. Finally, there's the burn-down chart, the most granular of the 3 tracking methods. A burn-down chart measures time against the amount of work done and the amount of work remaining. Their main uses are to keep the project team on top of targeted completion dates and to keep the team aware of scope creep as it occurs. Burn-down charts are best suited for projects that require a detailed, broken-down review of each task associated with a project. And they're great for projects where finishing on time is the top priority. The y-axis, or the vertical axis, symbolizes the number of tasks left to complete, and the x-axis, or the horizontal axis, signifies time. Progress gets tracked from the upper left-hand corner of the chart. As the project goes along, you'll track down, working your way toward 0 remaining tasks, and to the right, working your way toward your end date. There's typically a dotted line for your expected or projected progress, based on the rate your team is expected to close tasks, and a solid line representing your actual progress. Before you continue on with your project, you'll need to decide which tracker makes the most sense. If you need to communicate milestones to a large team, you might choose a roadmap. If you have a project with multiple dependencies, you might choose a Gantt chart. If tracking tasks against your deadline is especially important, then the burn-down chart might be your best option. And you may even decide to use more than one. Because the tracking method will be determined by the type of project you're working on, your resources, and the project scope, you'll probably end up using several types of tracking methods at some point in your career. In my time at Google, I've regularly combined methods and used a few different types together. For example, using a Gantt chart to scope work at the beginning of a project, then switching to a burn-down chart in the weeks before a launch to make sure we're good to go. Now you know a bit more about the various types of tracking methods, including a roadmap, Gantt chart, and burn-down chart. Next up, we'll focus on understanding continuous improvement and process improvement. Welcome back. In an earlier video, we learned about how to identify risks when planning projects. In this module, we'll learn why risks and changes might occur during a project and how that can impact your project's scope. You may remember that a risk is a potential event that might occur and could impact your project. When you think about risks in the context of project management, you'll think about them as hypothetical. In other words, these might not be events that will definitely happen, but because there's a possibility that they could happen, it's your responsibility as a project manager to identify and plan for those risks. Let's revisit some examples of risks. A project risk might be a contractor missing a deadline, or introducing a tool that may lead to communication breakdown within your team, or unexpected additional work because of an unforeseen policy being put in place. When any risk occurs, the consequence is a change to the project plan. A change is anything that alters or impacts the tasks, structures, or processes within a project. Changes are typically unexpected. More often than not, they have a negative impact on the project, and you'll have to learn to navigate that. But sometimes, and I'm placing a heavy emphasis on sometimes, changes can have a positive impact. Changes can encompass any variance from the original project plan in regards to the triple constraint. This may entail changing priorities and scope, budget and resources, or changes to the project timeline. We'll discuss how the internal and external dependencies of a project impact each other and bring about change. Let's go through a few types of changes that can affect your project. Some examples of changes may include new or changing dependencies. Dependencies are tasks, activities, or milestones that are reliant on one another. So if one task isn't completed on time, it may put your other tasks behind. You might be in charge of renovations on a home where there are dependencies. In a bathroom remodel, for instance, a new sink cannot be installed until the vanity and plumbing are in place. Next is changing priorities. The scope of the remodel changes if your client's in-laws suddenly have to move in, and you have to move up planned work on the spare bedroom before completing the bathroom remodel. Next up, the capacity and people available could change. Maybe you have to replace the plumber because you had issues on the job site. Another type of change could include a new limitation on your budget or resources. For example, you need to reduce design costs in the new bathroom by 10% because your quotes for electrical work come in higher than expected. Another change could be scope creep. Scope creep is when changes, growth, and other factors affect the project scope. For instance, your clients are so happy with the tile in the new bathroom that they'd like to replace the tile in all of their bathrooms. And finally, force majeure. This is another change that could occur due to a national or international crisis. If you aren't familiar with this term, it means an unforeseen circumstance that prevents someone from fulfilling the contract due to a major crisis. Force majeure is pretty uncommon, but for instance, if a union goes on strike, certain vendors won't be able to fulfill their contracts. If there's a pandemic, all production on your new product might be halted. Changes should be measured against the baseline estimates of scope, budget, and time allotted for your project, given the original requirements. Be mindful that when you change any one of those things, there may be knock-on effects, which could be positive or negative. For instance, your clients may believe they have beautiful hardwood floors hiding underneath old living room carpet, and want to pull up the old carpet and use the original hardwood floors underneath. You, the project manager on this particular construction job, you've budgeted to have the carpet removed and the old floors sanded and stained. Bad news, you pull up the carpet and find that the floors are in bad shape and rotting. They'll need to be replaced or repaired, which could be costly, so your timeline and budget are likely to take a hit. When it comes to who takes on the responsibility of managing the changing scope, it'll be you, the project manager. But depending on the project, you probably won't do it alone. In order to properly manage changes, you'll want to refer to documents like your statement of work and the RACI chart, but you might also have to create some new documentation. You'll want to create or familiarize yourself with the processes for requesting changes for your team or organization. These processes might include a change request form. Let's discuss change request forms. You and your stakeholders will use these forms in order to stay on top of and adequately manage any changes. Since a lot of people with different roles on the project can fill out these forms, it's important for the forms to be self-explanatory and very thorough. In the provided template, which uses a 2x10 table, you'll need to include information in the cells such as the project name, the discussion owner, who's taking the lead on this discussion from the team, discussion type. You'll want to let your audience know if you'll be discussing a risk, opportunity, or anything else. You'll want to identify the teams involved and the expected outcome of the discussion, which might be a change in priorities, schedule change, or an official call on how to proceed with an issue. Add the target date for discussion and identify which milestones or goals might be impacted. Provide a short description of the current situation, the change, and any difference you expect to make to the plan of record, like a snapshot of the before and after. Then go into in-depth proposal for the necessary changes and address any trade-offs. And finally, provide any background information so that everyone shares the same context. You can also refer to your statement of work, or SOW, for more information about who needs to be involved in that conversation. If you find that one or more of your milestones are at risk of not being completed, then you'll need to get a customer sign-off before the scope, deadline, or budget are changed, and all parties involved need to be informed. Great work! We've reviewed how to define risk and know more about how to identify the reasons why risks and changes might occur during a project. And now we can explain the impact of increasing a project's scope. In the next video, we're going to discuss the role dependencies play and how to properly manage them. We'll meet you there. So we've covered risks and how they affect a project, but we haven't fully discussed dependencies, arguably one of the biggest factors in a project. In this video, we'll discuss dependencies, both internal and external, how to identify and track them, as well as their importance. There are a few different types of dependencies, and we'll discuss a few examples of each one. So what exactly are dependencies? Dependencies are the links that connect one project task to another. And, as we mentioned, they're often the greatest source of risk to a project. Two or more project tasks may have a relationship with one another in which the completion of one task is reliant on the initiation of another task, and vice versa. Think of these tasks like a line of dominoes, toppling each other over one by one. If one domino falls, it'll knock the next one over, and so on and so on. For instance, a construction company may have a number of jobs across the city. Each project requires a foreman and a project manager to be chosen before the requirements, timeline, and budget get sign-off, and the crew is chosen. You wouldn't choose a crew and tell them to get to work before the work has been clearly scoped and the contracts were signed. That's an example of an internal dependency, which describes the relationship between two tasks within the same project. External dependencies, on the other hand, refer to tasks that are reliant on outside factors, like regulatory agencies or other projects. For instance, if a construction company is scheduled to demolish a building site, they'll have to wait until their project is approved by the city. External dependencies aren't always in the project manager's control, but it's important to be aware of them so that the project stays on track. Mandatory dependencies are tasks that are legally or contractually required. For instance, when that construction company finishes the demolition and starts the rebuild, they'll first have to pour a concrete foundation and then have it inspected by the city to ensure it meets their standards before the construction company can continue to build. Lastly, discretionary dependencies are defined by the project team. These are dependencies that could occur on their own, but the team saw a need to make those dependencies reliant on one another. For instance, the construction company may be using concrete from a new supplier and want to run a test, pouring a portion of the foundation to get a better estimate of the total amount of product they'll need to complete the foundation rather than buying too much or too little product up front. The task of pouring a portion of the foundation comes first because the team needed more information before making a decision. A project manager has to work diligently to incorporate dependency management. Dependency management is the process of managing all of these interrelated tasks and resources within the project to ensure that your overall project is completed successfully, on time, and in budget. To pursue effective dependency management, there are 4 important steps that a project manager can take: proper identification, recording dependencies, continuous monitoring and control, and efficient communication. The first step is proper identification. A project manager will have to brainstorm all possible project dependencies with their team and categorize them accordingly. Next step is recording dependencies. After all dependencies are identified, a risk register should be created. A risk register is a table or chart that contains your list of risks and dependencies. The risk register should include a description of the dependency, the date, and all activities or tasks that may be impacted by the dependency. Then, a project manager will want to maintain continuous monitoring and control. This means you will want to schedule regular meetings to check in on the interrelated tasks, staying up to date on any progress being made, and double-checking for changes that will impact other tasks. Last up is efficient communication. Keeping the project team and stakeholders updated can help resolve dependencies and keep the project going strong. To recap, we just discussed how to define dependencies, both internal and external, and we learned the importance of managing and tracking dependencies. We also discussed the importance of clearly defining dependencies at the project outset, like in our foundation example, and learned about dependency management. In the next video, we'll give you concrete techniques to manage the risks in your project. I'll meet you there.
Alright, there are actually more videos, but since our time's limited, I will just stop the videos here. Feel free to always find more videos. You can go to that Coursera course and finish the remaining videos for course 4, which is project execution. But basically, during project execution, for engineers, we are basically completing the actual tasks, right? That's the most time spent. The thing is, usually there are changes happening during that phase. There are risks that got realized or exposed. There are obstacles sometimes we run into, and then sometimes we happen to make great progress ahead of the schedule. So as an engineer, usually we don't have to spend too much in terms of managing risks, mitigating risks. That's usually project management's role to figure that out. And then tracking the progress, usually that's also not our role. Our role is just reporting the progress, right? And as accurate as possible. And again, like what I've mentioned already during the planning phase, it's important to communicate the progress correctly, but also communicate obstacles correctly. Even though you may feel, hey, it's a bit shameful, or I'm not really comfortable communicating my failures, like in a task or stuff like that. But it's still pretty important for the engineer to be honest here and communicate those things as soon as possible. And it's really important in terms of the product success. So again, ideally we want to make sure that the project is a teamwork, right? Even in the Agile course we mentioned, like there's no losing member in a winning team, and there's no winning member in a losing team. So same here, a successful project, like the end goal is to to deliver a successful project, and even that means your part, you failed some of your part in the project, but as long as the team as a whole are winning, are delivering the project, you are technically not really losing, or you're not really failing. So remembering that, I think, and being honest and being straightforward on the challenges, on the obstacles you might face while you're completing the tasks, executing the project, and then communicating that well. That's what I think is important in terms of our role. Okay, so then that's everything for this course. We've now looked at the other perspective of IT projects, and then what's our role in that. and all that. It's kind of flexible, and then you kind of have to think about how to apply that depending on the methodology you choose or the team choose. But the principle, I think, is still there. Fundamentally, I think we want to deliver successful projects, IT projects, and we want everybody, especially engineers, to play as a team member, and not only successful in their own tasks, but also help the team to success together. And then I want to emphasize again that means not only technically we need to be expert, we need to be more professional, like in programming, everything we talk about, like programming languages, the frameworks, BDD, by doing testing, refactoring, writing beautiful code, all that. Yeah, that's great. Of course, that's important, but also communicating. That's also important. Even though you are just a developer, you're just engineer, your main role is to complete the task, to actually write the code. But the other important role is to be a team member, to communicate well, and to ensure the success of the team altogether. All right, so that's it for today. And there's no additional homework for this week. So you may continue to finish whatever you haven't finished yet. And if you have already started with your final, either the final project or the final essay, that's great. Continue to work on that. And then please remember the timeline. I think deadline is somewhere next week. You can check the academic calendar to find that information. Alright, so that's it. And then I'll see you on Thursday, and then we will have a recap of everything we've learned. Alright, bye.